Hi, welcome. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec to Insanity. Today, you just get me, so it's going to be kind of fun. This is, welcome from, where the hell am I at? Mexico. Yeah, greetings from Mexico. So I'm glad you're here. I'm not sure how many people are going to be watching this live, but if you are watching it live, then you can put in all kinds of questions and give your own perspectives on things. The title of today's show is 30 plus years. So for those of you who know me, I've been in this industry for a long time. I think it just makes me old, to be honest. 30 years. And I'm curious, have we made any progress? I have this crazy ass mission, and the mission is to fix the broken industry. So, and really when you break that down, what that means is everything that I do in this industry and everything that my team does in this industry, we have to ask ourselves, are we contributing to the fix or are we making things worse? The good thing is that keeps us honest. So I'm not going to, and our team won't sell products to you that you don't need, that don't work, that aren't the next best place for you to spend your information security dollar. There's lots of things that are broken in this industry. It also means that when we look at things, can we create solutions? Is there a solution that we can create to fix a problem? So, and I'll go over a lot of that stuff as we talk through tonight. The question where this all came from is I was curious, and I don't know if you guys are all like me, but when I'm curious, I just, ADHD gets the best of me and I just do shit. So one of the shits that I did was I posted something on LinkedIn, and the question was, and I did this for a couple of reasons. One, I have my own opinion, like most of you. They say what? Opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. So I had my own opinion, but I wanted to hear other people's perspective. So I posted something on LinkedIn, and I'm just going to share it with you really quick if you're watching this live, and get it going here. Okay, here. Hold on, I'm totally doing it. I'm not as inept as it might seem. So here's the post. Posted on LinkedIn, and the question was, my first paying job in this industry was in 1992. The first job I had, and so before that, I didn't realize you could get paid for this stuff. I didn't realize you could get paid for doing what essentially was being an only child, two parents in tech, had a lot of time on my hands, and then you couple that with ADHD. It led me to doing a lot of crazy things, stealing internet from neighbors, stealing Windows 95 from Microsoft in 1994, maybe, or 3. I don't remember. No, crap, that's a whole nother story. So it was 1992-ish when I started getting paid, and I worked for IBM, and my job was really to clean boot sector viruses off of Windows 3 machines. The industry was really crazy back then. There really wasn't an industry back in 1992. But as you progress, I went from that to networking, became a Cisco engineer, started teaching Cisco classes. And back in the 90s, man, they paid you tons of cash for this. After that, found my way to Jask Software. I don't know if any of you know what Jask Software is, but we were the makers of Paint Shop Pro. So those of you around, I don't know, the year 2000, late 90s, early 2000s, Paint Shop Pro, you had really two options. This was kind of the advent of digital photography. Hey, Matt, good to see you, man. You need to put some, so on the live chat, feel free to type things. If you have something, and I don't know how many people are going to be watching, or anybody other than just me and Matt, feel free to chime in anytime. I'm going to ask for your perspectives, and I expect you to share them. So where did I go with that? Oh, Jask Software. Yeah, you had two options. This was when Kodak was coming out with their first ever kind of digital photography in the, little boxes, whatever. You had two options for editing photos. You had either Paint Shop Pro or you had Photoshop. Photoshop at that time was like $1,200. So, that, or you could buy the shareware Paint Shop Pro. The big thing that they had that we didn't, they had CMYK. Everything was RGB. That's just different color algorithms anyway. So I went from that. Where did I go from there? Oh, that company was bought by Corel. If you know Corel, they did a whole bunch of weird shit. They're French Canadians, so a little weird. Went from there to US Bank, built US Bank's incident response team. So they didn't have one back then. A whole bunch of stories. So anyway, all this stuff. the mission really came about in, I would say maybe 2009. And it came about because FR Secure at that time, we only had 2 employees. It was me and a business partner who's still with me today. I call him my business wife. That's Kevin. He's better looking than me. He's always had bail money budgeted for me, so it's cool. So, but there was a company that was interested in buying just our little company. It wasn't a software company, just consulting. I was in the middle of losing my house at the time. I mean, it was a crazy time, and what they really wanted to buy was the way we did things. They wanted to buy our methodology, which came from, years of doing shit. And they asked how much. And I wasn't interested in selling. I've never been in this. I mean, it's crazy when you look back that many years ago. It's like, man, I've learned so much. It's kind of funny now. They asked how much. And I said $3 million. And they laughed. I'm like, all right, that's cool. So we left. We were sitting in the car and Kevin asked me, why are you doing this? I mean, why are you so passionate about this? And I said, well, it's the mission, man. He's like, what's the mission? I go, it's to fix the broken industry. And that was the first time I actually verbalized it. And, he didn't laugh at me. He's still with me today. And it seems super crazy back then. You fast forward to today, FR Secure is doing great, 100 some odd employees. Still stays true to the mission. It's all about the mission there. Security Studio, a whole bunch of things have changed. But you look at the 30 some odd years from the beginning in 1992 to today, and if my mission is this, then I have to ask, have we made any progress? I mean, are we better off today than we were back in 1992? And so I posed that question. I posed that question on LinkedIn, and I made just a poll out of it. And this is what the poll results were. So only 130 votes. There were 40 comments, which is interesting because we'll get through those because that's your perspective, which was really important to me when I asked this question. 130 votes. There were, 6,000 or some odd people who saw it. And I think there may be, some speculation on why only 130 people answered the question. I think some people are maybe intimidated to answer the question. I think the world that we live in today, some people are afraid to share their perspective on things. But this is what the results were. So my opinion, I'm not even going to tell you yet, but 25% of the 130 said yes. Ultimately, we are more secure today in 2024 than we were in 1992. 40% said no. And then 35% gave a gray area. And the reason why I gave gray area is because hoping that people would share their perspective on the hell that means. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. I want to talk about the 25% that said yes, the 40% that said no, 35% that said gray area. I want to get these perspectives. I'm not going to make fun of them. The whole purpose of asking this was to get perspective, to understand better. And I'll explain why that's important. So tonight, what I'm going to share, now that I've shown you that, I'm going to go ahead and stop that sharing. I'm going to share why credibility matters. Because when I share my perspective, you got to know, is this guy even credible? I mean, does Evan even know what the fuck he's talking about? Excuse my language. Maybe I don't, right? Credibility is really important when you consider somebody's perspective. Go back to, there's going to be a lot of ADHD moments as I talk to you. No guest today, so I just get to run with it. I get to say whatever the hell I want to say. And I ADHD a lot. So it might be frustrating for you to hear and kind of follow along with what the hell I'm saying. I'm not going to edit this before I publish it as the podcast file. Just that's the way it is. So number one, why credibility matters. I'm going to talk about that. Number two, why perspective matters. Why do I even give a crap about your perspective or anybody else's perspective for that matter? I am a guy who genuinely, in most cases, don't care what you think about me. It doesn't mean I don't care what you think. A little different. So we'll talk about why your perspective matters and why it should matter to all of us. I mean, if you're an information security person, why should perspective matter to you? If you're just any person, why would perspective matter? Especially after you have the election that ended last week. Man, you've got everybody sharing their damn perspectives, left, right, all over the damn place. Some of it seems crazy. Some of it seems, all right, I can kind of understand that. The truth is, everybody's perspective is valid. And this is going to be interesting, as I talk about that to see if you agree with what I'm saying. So number one, again, why credibility matters. Two, why perspective matters. And then I'm going to talk about your perspectives on the question that I posed. Like I said, there were 40 comments on this one post. And let's go through some of them. Let's just see where they're coming from, and how it applies to the question. Some of it you'll agree with, some of it you won't. And then we'll talk about my backstory behind the question. I'll talk a little bit more about to try to earn some credibility with you. The thing about credibility, there's a fine line between credibility and ego. And once you've kind of felt like you've established credibility with somebody, I think it's really important just to shut up. Anything beyond that, then I'm just serving my ego. So we'll talk about the backstory, and then I'll tell you my perspective and how I would answer this question. And I'll try to back it up. I'll try to back it up with some data, some statistics. And that through all of that, we still want to come away with your perspective, my perspective. They both matter. We don't have to agree on the conclusion. The important part of the exercise is how when you take other people's perspectives into account while you're solving a problem, while you're answering something like this, how it makes the solution that much better. Really difficult problems require context. And the way you'll get context is perspectives, not just mine, but multiple angles. So I'm going to go through all that stuff. So first, why does credibility matter? The truth is, credibility, it forms the foundation of trust, respect, influence in all of your personal relationships. Same is true in professional settings, in your job. If you're not viewed as credible, man, it makes your job a hell of a lot harder. And people don't take your advice. When you go back to like what a CISO does, what most of us do in this industry, we don't make the risk decisions. We consult people to make the risk decisions. You're going to be a lot more successful if from where you're coming from, it's credible. It's viewed as credible. Three things you're always going to need: credibility, trust, and likability. But we're just going to focus on credibility right now. So when someone, say the organization is credible or you're credible, people are more likely to believe you. People are more likely to support you, and they'll follow you. So credibility is important in all those things. It's taken into account, or it should be taken into account in everything, in all of your personal relationships and the things that you're talking to people about. And the thing about credibility too, that sometimes we miss is we just rush to judgment. We don't even think about the source of the information. My father gave me great advice when I was growing up. Being an only child and moving a lot in the Marine Corps, it was hard to make friends because as soon as you started making friends, you got moved into somewhere else and made to make friends again. But you're always kind of that outsider too. And so people, back then, kids, that's funny, man. I think today, a lot of adults sort of act like kids. I call them, there's men and there's boys who can shave. There's a difference between the two. I think what makes a man, I'm not going to talk about women, and I'm not going to talk about the sexism thing and misogyny, all that other crap that's kind of floating in the world today. But what makes a man is accountability, responsibility, stepping up to the plate, doing the things that need to be done when they need to be done, not pointing fingers at other people, all that stuff. But when we were kids, you'd make fun of each other, right? And especially if you're the outsider, the new kid who's not wearing the same clothes or whatever, when you were getting it would hurt, right? And one of the things, you probably all heard is, well, sticks and stones may break your bones. But my dad also said, consider the source, right? When somebody attacks your character, when somebody isn't listening to you, consider the source, right? Do that. And then you kind of figure out, well, does it matter or not? And so if somebody's ripping on some of the things advice I'm giving, for instance, fine. I mean, rip on my advice, consider the source. If that source is credible, well, then maybe I'll put some stake in that, right? Maybe I'll change some of the things I'm doing. If I don't view it as credible, then I probably don't give two shits. The same thing happens with us, right? When we're doing our work, when we're interacting with people in our community, if we're not credible, who cares, right? So there's that reason, but then and I'm just going to allude on that. Allude? Is that even the right word? I don't even know what the fuck allude means. I have to Google that or ask ChatGPT. But 7 things. I'm going to give you 7 things, 7 reasons why credibility matters. It's essential. Number 1, it builds trust. It builds trust and reliability. It fosters trust. It's essential for those effective relationships and all your communication. Number 2, influence and persuasion. Somebody who's viewed as credible has a lot of influence. They can get things. I don't know if you've ever done this, but I've been hired a lot over the years as a consultant. And the advice that I've given after, whatever I'm doing, whether it's, giving advice after an assessment or answering a specific question, I may answer that question exactly the same way that the internal resource, the person who hired me, has already answered it multiple times. But when I say it, everybody takes note, and then we start doing it. And that person usually is like wondering, what the hell, man? I've said the same damn thing. Why didn't they listen to me? It goes back often to credibility. They don't view you. It's not that you aren't credible. From their perspective, which we're going to talk about next, from their perspective, you're not viewed as credible, which is a lot different. Credibility. So when you're, consulting people, or, whether you're, trying to get management buy-in, trying to get budget, trying to get people to do things, maybe get multi-factor authentication implemented or take ownership of an application, whatever it is, and you're frustrated because they're not listening to you, internalize that. Am I viewed as credible? Do they not think I know what the hell I'm doing? Or maybe they don't trust you. Those are really tightly integrated, but credibility is super important. So that influence and persuasion, that's number 2. Number 3, professional success and reputation often comes from credibility. These are all tightly integrated. But the more credible you are, or the more credible you are viewed by the people that matter, usually translates into better or more professional success and reputation. Reduces doubt and challenges. That's a big one. Sometimes, and especially like in our industry, there's so many different competing, I think, viewpoints, different perspectives, different frameworks, different methodologies, different whatever. Why are you using that? Why did you make that recommendation? Reducing that doubt saves a hell of a lot of time and helps us get things done. Long-term loyalty and relationships comes from credibility. Often it's a byproduct. Crisis resilience. When you're viewed as credible and everybody else is running for the hills, freaking out, burning their hair. If you're credible, you'll be able to put, depending, you've been there before, right? That kind of thing. I've been accused numerous times in incident responses for not caring because everybody's freaking out. And, what's the sense in freaking out? You've kind of seen it before. You've done it before. And you ask them, well, why? Why would you think that I don't care? Why would you think that I don't want to be here? I'm like, well, because you're not freaking out. I'm like, well, shit, would it be better if I freaked out? No, it wouldn't. But so crisis resilience also comes from credibility. And the last one, number 7, it supports ethical integrity. This is a really important thing, especially when you're talking about mission driven. I say things like mission before money. It keeps me honest if I'm credible. So it supports that ethical and credit. It's closely linked to ethical integrity. People who maintain their credibility over the long term, they're usually the people that do stick to a high ethical standard. So in short, credibility matters, right? And I'm going to get back to why that matters in this discussion and why it matters to this question that we're going to tackle. Again, the question is, have we made any progress? From 1992 to 2024, are we more secure or less secure? If I'm going to tackle that, you should be questioning my credibility as we talk about it. So in examples, and it's funny because in full transparency, where I struggle myself with credibility is mostly due to the fact that, number 1, I do things sometimes that are pretty counterculture, right? Things that may not make business sense, but they make perfect sense to me, being driven by this mission. That causes issues because people are skeptical of that, and they have one of two things that they're probably going to do with it. And I'll give you some examples in a minute. I say we're going to do this thing. Doesn't make business sense. We're going to do it for free. And, why the hell would you do that, right? People are going to be skeptical. And then they usually either just rush to judgment, which then means they're going to stay skeptical. They're going to continue to view me as being not credible, or, and this is what I want them to do, is call my bullshit. when you call somebody's bullshit, you give them the opportunity to establish that credibility. And so I always ask people, when I say what I say, they're like, man, really? Like, call my bullshit. Because that will establish credibility. You'll find that what I'm saying is true, right? So you might think that, calling bullshit is a bad thing, but feel free to call bullshit on me anytime you want. Now, examples of this, I'll give you four. Number one, the CISSP Mentor Program. If you haven't heard of the CISSP Mentor Program before, it's free, and people are like, as soon as you say free, people are, what? Come on. In this industry, what's free? And if it's free, it must be no value. Well, then what's the sense in even doing it? So the CISSP Mentor Program, I started that in 2010 and started with 6 students. And the reason why I started it was because, just like you hear it today, but maybe a little bit less with all the noise, I was continually told that we don't have enough talent in this industry. There's not enough people to fill the seats. Like, well, why? Why would that be? And so you start thinking, well, maybe training is too expensive for people, especially if you have to pay for it yourself, or a lot of companies don't want to pay for training because they figure once you get trained up, you're going to leave. So I started this. I'm like, well, we'll just do free training. We'll prepare people for their CISSP. And even if they don't want to, or they're not ready to take their CISSP, they'll still learn the fundamentals of information security and why that's so important. So it was teaching everything you needed to know to pass the CISSP, but also tell you the bullshit that you can kind of forget later. Like, you're probably not going to use Bell LaPadula or BIBA or whatever the hell else, So we started that program with 6 students. And that was 2010. So now we're in 2024. So 15 years. So this last one was the 15th year. And all along, people were like, bullshit. You don't give away free training. I'm like, no, it's free. Well, there's got to be strings attached. I mean, there's got to be like, I don't know, marketing. Do you like spam them all the time? Or no, man, it's free. No strings attached. It's part of like trying to fix shit that's broken in our industry. And so 15 years have gone by, and it's still the same damn thing. It's still free. And it's really cool because now it's been over 100,000 students have been through that program. And you get these emails from people, every year, saying thank you, or will you endorse me? And, so that's really cool shit. But the example for the credibility piece is the fact that people who saw this, they took advantage of it, and which is kind of in a way like calling bullshit, right? Okay, you're saying it's free, fine, I'll sign up. Let's see if it's really free. It's free. So that's awesome. Another one is the mission before money. But I think a lot of people in this industry, and a lot of people just in general, think that that's a buzz term or marketing ploy, something to like, you really care. We do really care, but it's truly mission before money. There's rules that I've established from the very beginning. One of those is, if you sell a customer something they don't need, I'll run you over with my truck. And so I had an F-250. No, I had an F-150, but then I went to an F-250 because we started hiring, I think, some bigger people like John Herman. I don't know if you've ever seen John Herman before. He's the CEO now of FR Security. He's a big dude. I'm going to need like an F-250, maybe a 350 Power Stroke to get over that dude. But I didn't. I didn't have to use it, thank God, because I don't know what that would have done to my career. I think it would have probably fucked that up. But anyway, the mission before money, people who over the years have gotten to know me, know that number one, I suck with money. Number two, I don't know how much money I have. I don't know how much money we have. And the reason why I don't is because I suck with money. If you gave it to me, I would just piss it away. It's not of value necessarily to me. It is in terms of what we can do with it for the mission. And there's been tons of examples over the year where we've had the opportunity to establish credibility behind that. FR Secure itself is product agnostic. It'll always be product agnostic. We don't sell anything. We never will sell anything. And the reason being is we need to keep the bias out of if we want to be the best information security consultants we can be, our advice, our recommendations have to be credible. They have to be as non-biased as possible. which means if I tell you your firewall sucks, it's because your firewall sucks. I'm not trying to sell you a firewall. It's not to say that others in this industry who sell products and consult that they're bad. I can't control what they do. I'm talking about our own credibility. And man, there's so many examples about the mission before money. I don't know today, at this very moment, I don't know how much money I have. I don't. I just know that when I put the card in the little machine that it still works. That's cool. My wife handles that. I didn't know how much I was getting paid. I was told this like 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. I don't do budgeting. We have people who do that are much better at it than I am. So, but I was told I got a raise. Shit, that's cool. How much do I get paid? They told me, and I'm like, is that more or less than what I'm getting paid now? What do I get paid now? It seems kind of stupid, but I think if I did get, really wrapped up in the money, I think the mission would suffer. So the phrase I use all the time is, if you focus on the mission, you'll make money. If you focus on the money, you won't make the mission. It's that simple. And when you say that, that usually drives things home. So that's another example of call my bullshit. Do it. I mean, it's every time you call somebody's bullshit, and you have to be, if you're one who wants to establish credibility with others, stay true. The things that you're going to say, you need to be able to back it up. If you don't back it up, well, then you just blew your credibility, not to mention the trust. But when you do say something, invite people to challenge it. Invite people to call bullshit, do it. Because all it's going to do is you're just going to win another person over, which just establishes more credibility, which just makes things better professionally, personally, kind of everywhere. A third example would be, opening up my own home, where I live here in Mexico. There's a whole story. And if you're wondering, is this Evan guy, crazy? Yeah, man. Hell yeah, crazy. Hopefully, mostly in a good way. I'm human, so I do bad shit too. Just try to do it a lot less than I did yesterday, kind of thing. But opening my home, so we bought this house here in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. That's where I live today. That's where I'm talking to you from right now. And we bought this place because I had a dream, like a real dream. I don't have dreams much, but the real dream was someday I'm going to buy a place. And it was probably 8 years ago is when this dream happened. I'm going to buy a place, someplace warm, and then treat my employees and friends and really anybody to come hang out and enjoy the things that I've been blessed with. And at the time, 8 years ago, there was no money. We were a much smaller organization. We were probably, to compare it to today, we were probably an eighth of the size we are today. So there wasn't any free money. Back in those days, we were probably worried most months on whether or not we were going to make payroll. So it was just this dream. And I shared it with my wife. I'm like, man, I don't know what the hell this means, but whatever. And she knows I'm crazy, but she still supports my crazy. So we just started going on vacations, just minor kind of vacations, thinking about, this place. Well, and then you fast forward to just a couple of years ago, we had the opportunity. We had the opportunity to buy, a large house, 7 bedrooms and plenty of space to treat a lot of people. And it's crazy because people, even after you went through this and you tell the story and you're invite people, anybody's welcome to come stay. The only rule I have is the no dickhead rule. As long as you don't violate the no dickhead rule, you're more than welcome to come hang out here for a week. We've had a couple of people over staying maybe a couple of weeks, but we're not going to talk about them. But it's a week. Most people stay here. And so when you did this and you're explaining this to people and they're like, yeah, bullshit. They won't take you up on the offer. At the end of the day, they just miss out, right? But I also wanted people to call the bullshit so we could no, this isn't bullshit. That's truly why I live here. It's truly why we bought this house, was to share it with other people. And the cool thing is a lot of people called the bullshit, so far. I think we've had over 160 something people stay here since we moved here 2 years ago. And my favorite one, the story is the random Twitter guy story. He's actually a friend of mine now, but he posted on Twitter. He asked for a recommendation. Does anybody know a place where I can take my girlfriend for her birthday in Mexico? And I just replied to his tweet, come to my place. And he's like, who the fuck are you? I'm like, I'm just some guy. And I said, there was more to the story. I told him that worst case, you come down here and, you only have one kidney when you go home. I mean, that's not a big deal. And if you don't turn me in and you don't complain too much about it, I'll share half the proceeds for that other kidney. But then I had cancer, so I lost a kidney. So I'm thinking now, if I did that, I would keep his kidney just for myself, so there'd be no money for him. Anyway, that isn't what happened. And that's not, obviously, I was joking about all that stuff, but he took me up on the offer. And now he's a good friend, and it's really cool that he called the bullshit. Last one I'll say is just that product agnostic thing. Those are the 4 that probably come top of mind right now on calling bullshit. All these things, when people call your bullshit and you back it up, man, it's a great way to establish that credibility. So, whether you do that at work, you do that at home, back it up, man, and you'll get that credibility, and then you get all the benefits that come with it. So call bullshit. Another reason I struggle with credibility, and the whole purpose of the podcast, not the whole purpose, but a big purpose of the podcast is just to be transparent, to be authentic. And I don't care how many people really listen. This is probably more of a mental health exercise for me than anything else, which is good. So the one reason about the credibility is not enough people. I think I do weird shit. And I think weird shit sometimes, if people just take it at the surface, they're not going to give you the opportunity to establish credibility. But if they do call your bullshit, awesome. So that's number one. The second reason I think I struggle sometimes with my own credibility, even being in this industry for as long as I have and done as much shit as I've done, still struggle. It's like anybody else does. I mean, whether you're brand new in this industry and you think you're struggling, and you think it's going to go away when you're 30 some odd years into this industry, it ain't going away. You're still going to have it. You're still going to deal with it. You just get, I think, a little bit better at it. And maybe you get, the more self-aware you are, the more you kind of grow from it. So another reason I struggle with credibility is I don't care. Honestly, I don't care a lot about what most people think. Which sounds kind of like brash, but it's true. I do care about your perspective, but I don't necessarily care what you think about me. I'm not seeking to build credibility with most people. It's just how I am. And I think I wrote this blog post a while back about the circles, right? And it explains a little bit about why I think this way. It's all about the circles. The first circle for me is Jesus. The second circle is my wife. The third circle is family. The fourth circle is friends, closer friends. The fifth circle is kind of acquaintances. And we're maybe not friends, but, there's respect and everything. And then there's everybody else. So if you do the math on all that, there's like 7 billion people or something in the United States, 7, 8 billion. Maybe 100, 200 of those actually give a shit about what they think about me. So that's kind of hard sometimes to establish credibility, but it's kind of almost by choice. But, it's definitely a challenge. The third reason, and the last reason I think I struggle with credibility sometimes is I don't like to brag. And the reason why I don't like to brag is, well, I said it a while back, and I think it was Oscar, episode 3 maybe of this podcast. And he came up with this saying, your ego is not your amigo. And man, that's totally true. The it's not my amigo. It's not your amigo. It's nobody's amigo. When I start bragging and, puffing out my chest, posturing, asserting my ego, then you become sort of unrelatable, intimidating. Sure, you might have credibility, like your shit, but kind of an asshole, maybe. So I don't want to be that way. So there's a fine line, like I said, but between establishing credibility and serving my own ego. I try to be cognizant of like if I've got your credibility, I'm gonna try to shut up about all the shit I've done. And so in truth, nobody knows the shit I've done. Nobody knows the extent of my experience. Nobody knows, the places I've been, the things I've done on purpose. You don't need to know. You might find it, oh, that's really super impressive. But then I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, it's cool. Maybe you can invite me to your next conference and I can give a keynote that I don't want to give or something. It doesn't work. All right. So credibility. Hopefully that all makes sense to you. I'll come back to establishing my credibility a little bit when I get to the backstory. Again, going back to this question, I wanted to kind of walk us through this. I wanted to start with, okay, here's the question, but rather than just going right at it and me sharing my opinion with you, I think when you do kind of this walkthrough, you'll find nuggets, hopefully, of wisdom. And speaking of wisdom, I asked a wise person, like, where the hell do I get wisdom? Because I was curious, I want to be wise. I don't want to be a fool. And he said, well, you can either listen to people who are wise. That's one way. And he said another way is experience, but not the good kind, the experience with pain. So it made a lot of sense because I'm like, man, because I'm kind of my own worst enemy. I've definitely beat myself up a lot over the years. And that all comes out of wisdom, right? So the things that you share, I think these nuggets, hopefully, that you're finding in just this podcast is, well, that's kind of wise. I mean, maybe it is. I mean, it's definitely experience with pain. It's not intelligence. It's just that experience with pain thing. But hopefully it'll help you. So the next thing to talk about, we have credibility and then perspective. Because I posed this question, I didn't give a shit about how many likes I got. I didn't, that would just serve my ego. I don't find my identity in how many likes I get on LinkedIn. So it had nothing to do with that. It truly came down to, I wonder what everybody else thinks. I wonder what others, because I have my perspective. And I know that my perspective is just one of like many, many. So I wanted to, and every time I do this, when I ask for other people's perspective and they feel comfortable sharing it with me, it makes me better. It makes me smarter. It improves my understanding of things. And I'm going to talk about all that stuff about why perspective matters. That's why I asked it. And that's why I ask a lot of questions is, I'm not looking for the right answer. What the fuck is the right answer? And ultimately, are we more secure today than we were in 1992? It's kind of a qualitative, subjective sort of question. You could back it up. I mean, I could definitely back it up with what my perspective is, because it's my perspective. It's how I view it. But if you answer differently than me and you can back it up, it's really interesting. It's really interesting. Like, why would you say that? And when, you give some logic and reasoning behind it, it's like, damn, I didn't think of it that way. I walk away smarter. I walk away with a better understanding of things, not to mention, I think an ability to, empathy, an ability to maybe collaborate more with people, not be so damn close-minded all the time. So perspective, why perspective matters. I mean, perspective itself, if you don't know what, and it's fine if you don't know what that means, perspective, it shapes how I see the world, how we understand and interpret the world and everything in it. Our perspectives, they influence just about everything too. That importance of credibility, but perspective, it influences our thoughts. It influences relationships, personal growth, kind of everything, right? So your perspective, and the thing about perspectives is your perspective is going to be different than my perspective. We might draw similar conclusions from our perspective on things, but your perspective is unique to you. I don't know what it's like to be you. I don't know what it's like to, if I don't know you, I don't know shit about you. But even my closest friends, man, I think I know really well. I mean, there's some intimacy there. I understand their perspective better than had I not taken the time to know them better. But at the end of the day, I will never know their perspective the way they know their perspective. So your perspective is different for sure than my perspective. Now, depending upon the context or the topic, your perspective is going to, it's going to be so different than mine that we might need to spend some time being open-minded, considering why you believe, why you think the way you think. And this kind of started for me, where it really kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. This perspective thing was really around the time of COVID, because I'm more of a logic and reasoning guy. I'm not as much of an emotions, fear-driven kind of person, which is fine, right? I mean, we've all got to figure this shit out together. But so when I was looking at COVID stuff and I was trying to run like numbers, man, I had like 60 spreadsheets of like trying to figure out why the hell are we reacting and doing what we're doing. It didn't make any sense to me. So I would share my perspective. And holy shit, that wasn't a good idea, because what I found that was I got attacked a lot for that. So I was like, why the fuck do I get attacked for just trying to share my perspective? And what I found in that was when somebody can't defend a point, they either can't defend their perspective or they can't defend the conclusion that they're drawing from their perspective, they do one of two things. You either change the subject on me or you attack my character. So I learned that. And so that helps a lot today when I'm seeking out other people's perspectives, or when I'm sharing my own perspective, or the conclusions don't match, right? If I'm confident on where I got to or where I'm at, and people start calling me names, I kind of, all right, that's where you're at. I get it. My own mother, by the way, once called me a bigot. I'm an only child. She has no other children to do such things to, but she called me a bigot. And it was crazy. Because I kind of knew, I was already kind of figuring this shit out myself in my own mind. And rather than reacting and like, what the fuck, with more emotion, I was like, bigot. I'm not sure you're using that name or that word right. So I looked it up, and so I looked up the definition. Is this what you mean? Is this what you're saying? She's like, well, no. I'm like, okay, good. Because holy shit, if that's your perspective of me, fuck, I got a lot of work to do, because, I try not to be a bigot. But anyway, that stuff all makes sense. Their perspective, your perspective, they're all valid. What sometimes isn't valid is the conclusions that I draw from my perspective, especially when those perspectives aren't in context, or they're narrow-minded, right? I haven't opened myself up to other perspectives to bring into this equation. Then sometimes there's an issue. So the perspective is always valid, because the perspective really is your reality. My perspective is my reality. It's how I see the world. So for you to tell me my perspective is invalid is essentially what you're saying is my reality is invalid. Now, there are there are mentally ill people probably where maybe their reality isn't valid, but there's probably a better way to approach it than treating them that way. You kind of have to work through that too. But in most cases, their reality, their perspective is valid. So is mine. But we're just drawing conclusions that maybe aren't taking proper context. So for me to tell you that your perspective doesn't matter, it's almost like me telling you your reality doesn't matter. That's also really important. Maybe you see this in your own life. Maybe you see this in your work. I've heard many, 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 many information security people get frustrated, not get other perspectives, think that they know what's best, think that information security is the most important damn thing in the world, without taking into account another perspective, right? The CEO of an organization has lots of things on their mind. Information security probably isn't on the top of the list. It's not part of that perspective. So you have to marry that shit up. So considering other people's perspectives, it has a ton of benefits for me, for you, kind of for all of us. And I'm just going to go through 10 of them really quick. Number one, it builds empathy and compassion. When I understand or take the time to try to understand, first of all, realizing that your perspective is your reality, it's valid. That's really important, because from that place, I can try to figure out why you feel the way you feel, why you see things the way you see things. And this is really kind of hit home over the last week too, after the election. I started watching some of the reactions to the election, man, and I was like, if you were on my side, right? This is kind of what was happening. If you were on say you're on the winning side, you make fun of the people and they're lamenting, right? The crazy shit, maybe, from your perspective that they're posting or whatever. From the other, it's like evil, bad, It's like, holy shit, man. Not understanding that everybody's perspective really does matter. It helped me to figure out, why would somebody feel like that? Why would somebody be afraid? Why would somebody feel like it's okay to rub somebody's nose in it? That's the empathy thing. trying to figure out why, trying to figure out what it's like to be in their shoes. And then once you start to get there, then you can have compassion for it. Like, okay, I can see it. I can see why you feel that way. It hurts, and then whatever. So that building empathy and compassion, that's the first one. That's a very big benefit to perspective. The second one reduces conflict and misunderstanding. How often do we just jump down something without taking into account somebody else's perspective on this? I think the world in general has become very transactional and less relational. You can't really consider somebody else's perspective well without establishing some relationship with them. Once you understand this perspective thing, it definitely reduces conflict and misunderstandings. Second, promotes open-mindedness and learning. Man, that's why I asked the question. I mean, for all these reasons, but I wanted to understand why people saw it this way. Maybe I can learn a thing or two. I mean, once you get to the point where you feel like you got all this shit figured out, you think 32 years and have information security, like, I got it all figured out, man, I'm not even close. If I did, we'd already be fixed. So getting these other perspectives, you have to open your mind to it, right? Like, even if, at the surface, you'd be like, that's a stupid answer, or that's bullshit. Call the bullshit, read what they're saying, listen to what they're saying, and maybe they'll establish some credibility with you in that. 4, strengthens relationships and trust. 5, improves decision-making. The best decisions I've ever made in my life have been decisions with context, good context. The worst decisions, conversely, come from ones where I haven't sought out other perspectives, where I made decisions with shit context or no context at all, kind of in a bubble. And people pay for that, including myself. So improving your decision-making, if you want to be better at this job, if you want to make good decisions, learn to understand perspective, man. Learn to embrace it. So, yeah, I think sometimes one of the reasons why people maybe don't embrace perspective is for fear that maybe it's going to shake their reality a little too much. Maybe it's going to force them to reconsider some of their beliefs because they may find that what they've been believing all this time, maybe they should change the way they believe. You know what I mean? So sometimes people are very closed, I think, to sharing perspectives. Usually I think it's probably related to insecurity, but I can't control them. I can't make them take in my perspective, but I can be better, right? I can try to, value their perspective. 6, enhances communication skills. I've never really been a great communicator, I don't think, but the more people, it gives me more confidence when I do share the things that I share, because it's been validated, right? I've got multiple perspectives that I'm taking into account as I'm doing this thing or making this suggestion or designing something. I have a lot more confidence and from that confidence comes, I think, some good communication. We all know or been in places where, you communicate something, you're not 100% or you're not really sure. So you just kind of, talk, I think we should maybe we should do this. That's shit communication versus, saying it with confidence. That certainly helps on communication. From the other side, the only way to really get somebody's perspective is to listen. Listening is like more important from what I'm told, it's more important than the talking part. So yeah, you'll value people's opinions and perspectives when, it'll lead to better communication. Encourages collaboration and teamwork. Absolutely. Fosters a culture of awareness and inclusion. Inclusion's almost become a bad word for some people. Inclusion meaning it's not, and that's the thing that we've always, at FR Secure, there was a time, and this was probably, again, like 7, 8 years ago, where our leadership team, it was 4 of us in this leadership team. We had our meetings every Friday. They were weekly, just executive leadership team meetings. And it was the same bullshit every week because it was 4 guys with the same damn perspective, basically. We had the same backgrounds, sort of. We all grew up in kind of suburban, for me, after the military. We all went to suburban high schools. We all went to college. We're all white guys. We're all basically the same. Same or very similar perspectives on matters, right? So you'd come to these meetings and it was just a bunch of just regurgitating bullshit. And it got to the point where we're not having another one of these damn meetings until we get a different perspective here, something to challenge the way we're thinking, something to freshen things up. And so we need to figure out and be intentional about going to find a different perspective. So we hired our first female executive back then, and we didn't hire her just because she was female. If that was the only reason why we hired her, then we'd really be selling her short because we wouldn't value her perspective. That's really what we were hiring for, was a different perspective. So when we talk about diversity, at least where I can work and lead, diversity is more about perspectives, different perspectives. A person of a different color will have a different perspective than I do. Somebody who grows up in the inner city will have a different perspective than I do, regardless of their color. Somebody who's female will have a different perspective than, you know what I mean? So that's what I'm talking about the collaboration, teamwork, the inclusion, all that stuff. So that was number 8. It fosters this culture of awareness and inclusion. Number 9, it supports personal growth and self-awareness. It's, I don't like to hear the shit I do wrong often. Usually I'm my own worst enemy too, but when people feel comfortable sharing their perspective with me, when I ask them to share their perspective, their true and honest perspective with me, it helps me be more self-aware. It identifies blind spots that I didn't have or I didn't know I had. If I didn't value people's perspectives, then I wouldn't get that benefit. And all those benefits typically, result in, more personal growth. 10th, which is kind of a big thing, about especially today after the election and kind of the division. I think just the world is pretty divided. It makes a positive impact on society when I can actually open myself up to and value other people's perspectives. So those 2 things, if you're still with me, well, awesome. You're listening to this monotone voice, and we've gotten through credibility and we've gotten through perspective. So the next thing to talk about was your perspectives on this question. Back to the question. The question is, again, have we made progress or have we lost ground? Are we winning or losing? Ultimately, are we more secure today than we were in 1992? And the answers were, again, 25% said yes, we are more secure today than we were in 1992. 40% said no, we are not more secure than we were in 1992. 35% answered gray area. The gray area was just kind of like, it's not no, it's not yes, it's gray. I'm not sure, and I want to share my perspective, hopefully. So of that, we had 40 comments that were given, and I think they're all, again, if I approach this out of the gate, that every one of these perspectives is valid. The conclusion may be, I may take exception to it. I may not agree with it. I may not, that stuff is all cool, but what they say matters, right? Especially when I put it out here like this. So the first one was a guy says no. So his answer is no. We're not more secure today than we were in 1992, but probably need to back it up with some stats and numbers of SMBs put out of business by ransomware, etc., compared with number of SMBs put out of business due to, this was probably a joke, Windows 3.1 boot sector viruses. I think that's a valid perspective. Data would be great. For being such a data-driven industry, or claim to be data-driven, it's kind of sad, I think, the lack of data we actually have around some of these things. So yeah, I agree. Stats would always help. It'll definitely establish more credibility behind your opinion, behind your answer. But I think it's pretty good. The other one, I believe, from what I'm seeing, is in the gray area. From speaking with people where I've made recommendations. So speaking with people, this is somebody who went and got perspective. There's a long answer here. It's where I've made recommendations on software security controls or even simply implementing network segmentation with firewall rules to disallow specific ports services to other portions of their network. Some organizations don't want to implement MFA simply because they do not want to use the phone or even a USB device like YubiKey. I digress. There is progress, it seems, in some sectors and some not, as some of the organizations seem to either not care, can't afford it, too intrusive of a feeling. So there's a lot. This is a long answer. It's definitely an answer. Like if I wanted to understand this perspective, I think I need to spend a little more time kind of unraveling it a little bit. The cool thing is that somebody shared their perspective too many times. I can only imagine being in the shoes of somebody who's not in this industry or somebody who's maybe new to this industry, how if they feel intimidated by answering questions like this, like who am I to? I mean, well, why would my opinion matter? And that's one of the things that we really need to do a better job of, I think, in this industry is everybody's fucking opinion matters here because it's everybody's. I mean, we just have to take these perspectives and come to better agreement on things. Like if I were to reply to this person, and I purposely didn't reply because I didn't want to taint things. I didn't want people to hear what I'm thinking on this stuff. I would reach out and ask more like, explain this, how do you see this? And when they defend it, so this is where first of all, we agree on our perspectives, why they matter and all that stuff. But then you start to challenge the perspective a little bit, as they should with me as well. I'm like, tell me how this one, makes sense. Because I do want to understand it more. But then when you come to a point where it's like, okay, I don't understand how you got from here to there, that's when, at that point, you've probably established enough credibility together in working through perspective that, oh yeah, I kind of agree with yours better or more, or we just agree to disagree. I mean, both of those things are valid, but that's what I would do. I think with this one, there's a lot to it, right? I'd have to read through this more. I'd have to dissect it, unravel it, probably ask some follow-up questions and figure it out. So here's another one. The answer again, are we more secure than we were in 1992 or not? Here the comment is, for nearly every improvement we've made, more vulnerabilities arise. Are we more secure now? Yes. And a lot of it is due to individuals like you and your amazing team. The more connected we get, the more opportunities for vulnerabilities and system failures. This is my outside the industry opinion. All right. Well, ego stroke aside, again, this would also require, all these things here. That's the thing about social media. And I think communicating electronically is, man, this would be a fascinating, I think, discussion to like, all right. So for nearly every improvement we've made, more vulnerabilities arise. Are we more secure now? Yes. That one seems to disconnect the logic. Like for every improvement we've made, more vulnerabilities arise. So then maybe anyway, that would require, I think, more follow-up, but I do appreciate all the work you do or whatever thing. This one, more secure, in quotes, more secure is a qualitative statement. Agreed. It's a binary question-ish because it's yes, no. Getting to that conclusion, I think, is a lot of qualitative data, right? You'd have to opinion, whatever. So more secure is a qualitative statement. If I've learned anything, meanings are in people, not in words. In today's context, I'd say we're less secure overall due to the landscape changing and the threats evolving along with consumerization of IT. Just my 2 cents. Awesome. I think that's another, as I'm thinking through, and formulating, I already had my opinion and I feel like I can back up where I'm coming from. Taking into account these other perspectives just makes it, I think it makes me better. To be honest, I think it should. So here's another one I chose yes for a couple of reasons. One is that we are doing a much better job educating people on the dangers that exist. Those have dramatically changed over the years for sure, but boot sector viruses are pretty nasty too. Yeah. When I just referred to boot sector viruses, because that's what I was working on in 1992. That obviously wasn't the only threat we had in 1992, but it's cool. But that's how he got, his part of the perspective and like, okay, this is why you're sharing it this way, finds that common ground so then he can start kind of working through it. So number one, that was what he said. Two is that even small companies are investing in cybersecurity today, where in the past, it was an afterthought. The media may have something to do with that. In 1992, the attitude was that it will never happen to me, and today that isn't the case most of the time. That's an interesting perspective. My perspective would be the opposite in some of those things. So from where he works, from his viewpoint, from his vantage point, what he sees is that more and more small companies are investing in cybersecurity today, where in the past it was an afterthought, and that's justifying the progress. And the second is the attitude that it'll never happen to me. And today that isn't the case, where people feel like they just take the stance, it's never going to happen to me. And in his perspective, that's not the case. And in my perspective, maybe. I mean, maybe we've made, baby steps in that direction. But we've also got a lot more small businesses than we had in 1992. So you blend the two perspectives, right? It's interesting how that's what he's saying, from where he sits. Yeah. Something to definitely consider. And it helps you ponder this stuff too. Like, why the hell would you see it that way? Right? I'm not going to jump to the conclusions like, bullshit. I didn't know what I was talking about. That ain't going to work. At least if you want to create solutions. I mean, if you just want to be the guy that's just like, yeah, that's wrong. There are times I do that, but I try not to because it's not going to solve problems. So this guy says, Evan, I answered no, not because we weren't or aren't making progress, but because that progress is slow and often tied to budget and other constraints. More importantly, though, we are dealing with a change in the enemy's mindset. Rules of engagement have changed, the fronts have expanded, and we have limited resources to keep the attackers at bay. There was once a time, not too long ago, when hackers followed an unspoken code. While they might infiltrate corporations or challenge government systems, there were certain lines they wouldn't cross, particularly with essential services like hospitals, utilities, and public safety networks. Unfortunately, that line of honor has largely vanished. Today, we're seeing cybercriminals target sectors once considered off limits, with hospitals, utility companies, and even critical infrastructure falling victim to attacks. The stakes are higher than ever as attackers seek to extort money or cause widespread disruption with little regard for the consequences. Imagine a hospital under attack where critical medical records are held hostage or essential services are shut down. This can directly impact patient care and, in extreme cases, even put lives in immediate danger. Again, another perspective. It's interesting, man, because every time I read this, I'm like, man, okay. I'm trying to feel where you're coming from. And these are people that work in different places, right, in our industry. That was, the title or their position, I guess, or something. And their profile is cybersecurity expert. The one before that was IT director at an electric company. The one before that was director of IT from a county. Yeah. So trying to figure out like, okay, how do these things all tie together and how do they work? The other one was a cybersecurity expert at a very large tech company. Interesting. I'll go through a couple more and then I'm going to get into mine. But that hopefully you see the value. Like as I'm thinking about these things, I'm thinking, okay, this person made this comment. Let's think about, let's read it and then figure out like, okay, where do they sit in this? I mean, where's their credibility? In answering the question, their perspective, regardless of their credibility, is still valid. But I'm going to put a little more, I think, weight to the answer to the question based on credibility, right? So, if it was my mother answering this question, I'm definitely going to take into account her perspective because I'm her only child and it's really important, I guess. But credible? Maybe not. Where there's a lack of credibility, there's a little more, I think, opportunity. If you've got credibility, I think, to influence and maybe help massage, maybe shift maybe their perspective a little bit, because everybody's perspective is also subject to change, right? It's based on things that I learn, things that I see. So when somebody challenges my perspective and I can't defend why I see things the way I see things, well, then there's a good opportunity for, I think, my perspective to change, right? And the more compassion you show, the more empathy you show in valuing other people's perspective, it kind of does change your perspective a little bit on, yourself. But you don't go into these things. I don't go into these things trying to change your mind right off the bat. First, I got to value kind of your perspective, establish that credibility with you, and then I can start to influence and maybe shift your perspective a little bit. In all of that, that first step, understanding your perspective, another way we say that is meeting you where you're at, right? Oh, okay, that's how you see it. Okay, I see it now. I mean, that makes sense. I get it. I get why you would see things that way, and as you're working through that you may have already walked into the room with credibility, who knows? But if you've got that credibility, then you can kind of like, all right, I get it. I'm going to validate that you're not crazy. I'm going to validate that you're not stupid. I get where you got your perspective. Now let me help you. I'm going to share my perspective and see if it resonates. See if we can't, find some common ground in all this. So I'm going to share one more. I don't know. I'm going to pick one, maybe at random, but this one. This is a CEO of a company. Don't know who this person is. That's a founder, CEO of a company. And this is how he answered. Yes, I believe we are better off because if you practice good security hygiene as a user, then in parentheses, keep security patches up to date, use secure passwords, don't install unknown software, etc., there is a fairly low chance that you'll have issues. The major caveat here is that we have, again in quotes, parentheses, that's the circle things, right? Anyway, collectively and individually, a lot more data at risk than we did in 1992. Especially because at 7 years old, I had yet to get my first email account. That was probably 1995. All right. Yeah, again, it's trying to figure out, okay, why I believe we are better off. There's a good opportunity there. I think not necessarily the question, right? The question was, are we more secure than we were in 1992? So in a discussion with somebody nicely, right, you could maybe point that out. Because I agree, if you do practice good security hygiene, all those things, et cetera, fairly low chance, depends on context, right? Depends on the type of business. There's lots of things that go into whether there's a low chance maybe that you'll have issues. You're always going to have issues, right? This isn't a game of risk elimination. It's a risk management game. So yeah, there's probably a good opportunity there to validate that perspective. I get what you're saying. And I agree with it. Maybe we missed the question a little bit. We can get back to that, perhaps, something like that. So anyway, good stuff. And I love these. Hopefully you understand the purpose, the intentionality behind posting that on LinkedIn. I wanted to understand where people were coming from. I wanted to understand their perspective, validate their perspective, then have a discussion. I think a good, discussion about it all. The backstory of the question, I already touched on the backstory, so I'm going to get to sharing mine here in a minute. So the backstory for this question, I already kind of laid it out for you, right? I started in this industry in 1992. I didn't have the mission in 1992. Well, then, like I said, the mission came about in maybe 2009-ish, somewhere in there. I lose track of time because I'm old now. It was probably 2009, maybe 8. But anyway. And so that mission, and also you've got this thing like, I want to leave the world a better place than I found it. If I've spent 30 some odd years in this industry devoted to doing, what I say that I'm devoted to doing, then I think it's a valid question for me to ask myself, like, man, and knowing that I can only impact a certain part of this big equation, are we more secure, right? So it was 1992, a whole bunch of stuff and shit, experience that I'm not going to get into because it would serve my ego and I'd feel good. But whatever. Then you come up with the mission, and then a whole bunch more shit. Like, it's a lot of stuff, Yeah, you can read my bio somewhere if you want, if you care. I don't care to now, right? And so the backstory, that's mostly the backstory. So when I consider this myself, going back to the original question, are we more secure today than we were in 1992? Well, first off, if I was posed with a question like this, which I am, first I want to define what secure is. What do you mean secure? I need some common understanding of what that is. So in my definition, and this is just to justify, I think, my perspective on this matter. If I were to define what secure is, or security, it's risk management. So information security is risk management. Cybersecurity is risk management. Security is risk management. Safety is risk management. So another way I could pose this question, and this is how I would read it, is ultimately, are we less risky? Is there less risk today than there was in 1992? Well, what's risk? That's where I'd go next. Just my mind, risk. Less risk, more risk. Well, risk is likelihood of something bad happening, the impact if it did, right? So likelihood and impact. You have to kind of play those things out. So from my perspective, my gut, without giving you any data, without trying to back it up with anything, my gut would say no. Absolutely, we're not more secure today than we were in 1992. At that point, it's my opinion. So now I need to back it up a little bit. There's a lot of reasons why I think we're not more secure than we were in 1992. First off, I'll just start with the growth of technology and the attack surface. So there's more things to attack today than ever. If I were an attacker today, take your pick. And there's lots of data to support this growth, because the more stuff I have to attack, the more likely that it is going to be attacked, especially if there's any weakness in the technology or in that data, right? The common attack sequence would be, it's been this way since the beginning: identify a vulnerability, compromise the vulnerability, so now you have a foothold in the system. Step 3, elevate privileges, plant the back door, which would be establishing persistence. Step 4. And then depending on where I'm at, how much time I've spent as the attacker, if I've got more time, whatever, pivot. I'll pivot into something that might look a little more interesting if the target that I found the vulnerability and whatever isn't going to meet whatever objective I have. Delete log files. That's kind of the steps, right? And then come back later, whatever. So depending on the time frame, depending on work effort and all that other stuff, it's always identify the vulnerability, compromise the vulnerability, elevate privileges, pivot. Establish persistence was in there as well. Elevate privileges, establish persistence, pivot. You might pivot and then establish persistence, but anyway, those steps might be interchangeable. That's the same thing every time. So the more things there are to attack, the more likely they'll be attacked. And every piece of software, everywhere, every single piece of software ever has vulnerabilities. That vulnerability, which is the first step in the process, right? Now, and the average vulnerability, we usually say errors per KLOC, right? So maybe 7 errors per 1,000 lines of code. Just use that as a baseline. There's some data out there to support whatever number, 5, 7, 10. So, but let's say 7 errors per 1,000 lines of code. Keep adding more shit out there. Your attack surface, that's more lines of code. Just numbers would tell you, well, more bugs, more vulnerabilities. Some of those, when I say errors per 1,000 lines of code, they're not all security vulnerabilities. Some of them are just bugs, functional bugs, but some of them are security vulnerabilities. So the more you put out there, the more vulnerabilities there are going to be, which is more opportunity. So you're going to increase likelihood. In terms of impact, it's going to depend, but there's probably an impact statement there. Logically, you could follow that through without having the data. Right? The data helps, but it's not there. But I'll give you some data points on the growth of digital technology and attack surfaces. Internet adoption, for one, in 1992, The internet was there, but hell if anybody was using it. The data I found was in 1992, 0.05% of the world's population used the internet. I wasn't using the internet, that's for sure, in 1992. Today, the latest numbers we have is 2023. The internet penetration is 64.4% globally. That's according to data reportal. So there's a vast increase in the attack surface there. Another thing, look at connected devices. In 1992, digital devices, there were few of them, really, and most of them are standalone. There wasn't a lot of network connectivity, certainly not between networks. There was some local area network stuff. What would it have been back then? And that would have been bus networks for the most part. It had been a lot of Ethernet stuff. I don't think Apple Talk was there yet. There was some IPX, SPX stuff. But anyway, 1992, no, there wasn't any real connected devices. Today, the number of IoT devices, just IoT devices, that's not counting all the web servers and all the databases and all the containers and all the other shit out there, all the router, oh my God, right? Just IoT devices, it's projected to be 30.9 billion IoT devices by the year 2025, sorry. We already had 2023. So you go from very few, if any, to today, just IoT devices, 30.9 billion. Each of those, and those IoT devices don't do anything unless there's code to tell it to do things. So going back to that code thing, they're going to have bugs. They're going to have vulnerabilities. It just creates a lot more opportunity. Cloud and mobile technologies, in 1992, there was no cloud computing. There was the internet, but no cloud computing, no mobile internet. Today, 60%-ish, according to IBM anyway, 60% of the corporate data is stored in the cloud. Certainly efficient, cost-effective for a lot of businesses and people, but it also introduces risks if they're not properly secured. Now that's got a couple of issues, right? You've got the likelihood thing, but then the impact, right? We've seen some of the global attacks and what they do. It's bad. So that's one justification I would use to justify the fact that we are not more secure today than we were in 1992. The second thing I would use is a significant increase in cyber threats. We had cyber threats. I mean, I was one of them back then, but they were isolated. The motivation was much different, and it just continues to increase. So all these things, so even if you go, are we more secure today than we were, let's say in 2010, we still have this growth of digital technology in the attack surface, and it's almost exponential growth. So we're still not more secure, in my opinion, than we were back then. Increasing number, so that was number one, just the growth in the digital technology. Number two, the increase in cyber security threats. The cost of cyber crime, if you want to call it cyber crime, the cost of cyber crime is estimated to be about $500 million in 1992. There was cybercrime. It was primarily disruption of services, stealing things like long distance phone stuff, stuff like that. It wasn't like it is. There might have been ransomware. First version of ransomware was actually sent through the mail, snail mail. But anyway, so $500 million, the increase in cybercrime cost was $500 million adjusted for inflation in 1992. By 2023, the cost is estimated, so last year, the cost is estimated to be $8.4 trillion. Now, I question the data behind this a little bit. This comes from Cybersecurity Ventures, and I know enough about their methodologies, and because they're also estimating 10.5 trillion by 2025, maybe. The point is, whether you want to debate the details or just in general, we can probably all agree that cybercrime costs have increased a whole shitload since then. So that's one. Ransomware, there were attacks in the 80s and 90s, but they were, like I said, the first one ever, I think, was email, and there were some other things that we did. You can almost say that some of the boot sector virus stuff was ransomware. There was sometimes a money motivation behind it, but it was nearly non-existent. The FBI now, I think, in 2021, I think is the last data we have, was $4.5 billion. And that's going significantly higher all the time. Data breaches. There weren't a lot of data breaches in 1992 because not a lot of this data was stored online. 2023, I think was the record. We're probably going to exceed that this year. And these are just publicly disclosed breaches, right? We don't know the ones that aren't publicly disclosed, but 4,100, I think it was the first half of 2023, according to Identity Theft Resource Center. So that's the second reason, or second justification. Number one, just the growth, right, in the attack surface, the increased threats, advancements in security technologies. In some cases, I think have made things more secure, but I think in other cases have made things less secure. And the case here is there's a lot of people are using advanced security technologies in lieu of using the technology right? So take a firewall, for instance. You can block a shitload of attacks if you just use your firewall correctly. That's ingress and egress. I can count on one hand the number of really well-run firewalls I've seen in the last few years. Ingress and egress, right? Instead, what we do is we chase sometimes these advanced security technologies, thinking that that's going to somehow fix the fact that I don't have the fundamentals or the basics done. What that leads to is a false sense of security. You think the front door is now closed, so you're not watching it anymore, when in fact the front door isn't open still. It's kind of like that. So on the other side of that, we have improved here, right? So, I mean, to give credit where credit's due, we've got these other things that I think increase risk, but then we have had some significant advancements in security technologies since 1992. Encryption being one of them. Quantum's coming, so yes, that's going to change things a little bit. Multi-factor authentication, there's more of that today than ever. Certainly before 1992, we had multi-factor authentication in 1992, but it was really rare. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, the jury's kind of still out a little bit on that stuff, but it's an advancement. And I think there's a lot of potential. That's redundantly redundant. There's a lot of potential to use it properly. I think if history holds true, though, we still continue to this day, and there's you see it like I do, we continue to adopt new technology faster than our ability to use it responsibly. And so if we don't figure out some way to start correcting that behavior, what will happen with artificial intelligence and machine learning is it'll be a great technology with a boatload of potential, but we won't realize the potential because we're not using it right. That's my take. Network security improvements, for sure. We've got improvements in a lot of places with networks, which is where I grew up. I mean, that's my jam. But firewalls, even a basic firewall, just a static packet filtering firewall does a hell of a lot more than that's working properly. Does 10 times better than your next generation firewall that's not configured correctly. Challenges, complexity. So number 4, so I've got 3, right? Number 1, growth in digital technology and attack surfaces. 2, an increase in cybersecurity threats. Number 3, advancement in security technologies, which kind of has this mixed effect, I think. If you're using it right, absolutely. But when I say, are we more secure than we were in 1992, I'm not talking about just you. I'm talking about us, right? We as maybe a society. So 4, challenges and complexities of modern security. Human error is still way up there. The last DBIR, so that's Verizon's Data Breach Investigations Report, 2023. 2023, 82% of the breaches involve the human element. You're never going to be able to fix people with technology. We should stop, maybe trying to do that. So people that weren't using technology before are now using technology, and a lot of them are being taught to use the technology from people who weren't using the technology responsibly in the first place. It's kind of a recipe for not so good stuff. We also need to consider supply chain and third-party risks. That's still very, very significant. 51% of the companies, according to Deloitte in 2023, had experienced at least one supply chain attack within the previous year. This was largely absent in 1992. The attacks would have been physical back then, more so than anything electronic. Sophistication of cyber criminals. So the criminals themselves have become a hell of a lot more sophisticated. They actually run, I think, their business better than most businesses run their business. It's money. So that's that. And complexity. Complexity itself is the worst enemy of security. It's the more complex we make something, the harder it is to secure. We just make things more and more complex. I mean, the average home today, I don't know. I have, just in my house, number of systems, things connected to my home network here is, last time I looked, it was 43. So 43 systems. That's a hell of a lot harder to secure than 2 or none. More regulations, rising compliance burdens. It's a lot of stuff. So to summarize, just 4 points, right? The cost, 500 million-ish in 1992, 8 trillion in 2023. Internet and digital growth, just more people using it today. And maybe people that aren't, really cautious in using it. So 0.05% in 1992 to 64.4%. If you do the math on that, you're at maybe 5 billion people. So we went from, I don't know, maybe 10 million, 0.05 in 92, maybe that's 10 million people, to 64.4%. That's about 5 billion people in 2023. There's a lot more likelihood and potential impact. Right? The likelihood, because you've got more people using things, not to mention attack surface, all that other stuff. But now the impact is significantly increased too, because there's not a lot of information to get. There's not a lot of people to hurt. There's not a lot of things to do with such a small population in 92. The potential to affect 5 billion people, even a subset or multiple subsets of that, is really, really bad. IoT device explosion from 1992. We mentioned that. That's one other piece of the summary. And then just the data breach records. And the list can just go on and on. We just continue. I mean, the truth is we do continue to use new technology much faster than our ability to use it properly. And the problem just continues to exacerbate. It's almost like, yes, we've made significant progress, right, as security people, because I think sometimes we get defensive about this too. We've made progress, right? We've done a lot. People are more aware. We're kind of getting talked about more at the board level than we've ever done before. So it's like we've gone up, like if we said that we went up maybe just arbitrarily, I'm just trying to make the point. So don't hold me to the data points. So let's say we've increased our ability to secure things 5% or say 10% year over year, right? Awesome. In context, right? Thinking perspective in context, the attackers have improved, not necessarily their ability, but the opportunity, coupled with the opportunity coupled with the ability. If you've made a metric out of that, say hypothetically that's growing at 30% year over year. So you've got the 10 curve and you got the 30 curve. It gets wider and wider. That's sort of what it's like, right? So are we more secure than we were in 1992? I think if you really worked through all of this, you might find it, and using logic and reasoning, you might find it really difficult to say we are more secure than we were in 1992. And if you do feel that way, that'd be a great discussion to have, to see how we justify that. At the end of the day, there is no black and white. Here's all the data. Here's the metric to prove it. Until then, we'll just continue to sort of have these discussions. So there you have it. That's my take on it. Hopefully incredible enough that there's okay, good, whatever. But again, I enjoyed the whole exercise. I really enjoyed reading through people's opinions, their perspectives on these things. It helped me understand more about other parts of the world. I only see what I see, but when other people share what they see too, it helps you question, makes you question what you're seeing, and it adds to it. That's that. Now, I hopefully enjoyed this. Hopefully it was, somewhat enlightening or whatever. I'll just continue to get better and better at this. The tech actually works. I don't know if you were here last week, but last week I tried to do the podcast with my wife, who's pretty damn awesome. I think she's hot too. Makes it even better. But I wanted to hear her perspective on, are we adopting technology too much? Is there too much technology? And she shared a lot of great shit. The tech sucked. Hey, so most of the podcasts, this is like episode 9, so you got to iron out all the kinks and all that shit. So production will continue to get better. But this one the tech was crap, right? So we start off the live and there's nobody can hear her. The video looks like shit. So we did the whole discussion without kind of knowing that, and then came back and I looked at it, I'm like, oh crap. So we had to re-record that, and we did that, just her and I sitting right over there on Sunday. So we ended up having that discussion twice. So I got to get her perspective twice, which was pretty cool. So hopefully you enjoyed that one. Now next week we've got, if these guys don't back out on me, we've got Ryan Cloutier and Chris Roberts joining. And we're going to do kind of a one-time only security shit show reunion. And I think that's going to be pretty interesting. I miss those guys a little bit. We did like 102 shows over the course of 2 years. And those guys are near and dear to me. So that's it. That's a wrap. I hope you guys enjoyed. See you next week.